Good morning. Thanks to everyone who has logged on. I'm Dick Wagner. You're watching a presentation provided by the Crest Network. This particular presentation is entitled Selling Using Power Questions, and the goal is to help you become an ultra high performing sales professional. I hope I can teach you some powerful tools to dramatically improve your sales success. So we're going to dive right into this. And I see people are still continuing to log on, but we're going to move forward anyway. In today's world, and I mean today's world, 2011 and beyond, 2012 and beyond, after the quote unquote Great Recession, dramatic changes took place to the consumer attitudes, the culture, and the style of doing business that your client, your customer expected or wanted. And the challenge has been for businesses to differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And the reason is because if you aren't different, you aren't noticed, you don't stand out. On top of that, our society, the culture we live in today, is skeptical, it's mistrusting, it's often ruthless. Everybody is cautious. Frustratingly, it seems like nobody trusts anybody. And if you just want to see examples of that, all you have to do is read Facebook posts. The Democrats don't like the Republicans, and the Republicans don't like the Democrats, and it's turned into a very vicious climate. But that has created an extremely cautious society, and that cautious society really only cares about if you're trustworthy and you bring value. Let's think about this for just a moment. Many times the payback, in other words, what the client gets as a benefit, is often far more important than the actual product. And the best way to demonstrate this is to explain that when you go and buy a toothbrush, your primary reasons are not for the style of the toothbrush. It's not for the color, it's not for the shape, and generally it's not for the price. We buy a toothbrush and intend to use it for the reasons on the screen. We don't want bad breath, we don't want gum disease, cavities, root canals, we don't want tooth pain, and yeah, many of us don't like dentists. So it's our continued hope and expectation that when we buy a toothbrush, we can help prevent these specific pains. And that's typically the reason why someone is buying anything, is to solve a pain or an issue or a challenge or a difficulty. And those are some of those things we're going to hit on today. Ultra high performing salespeople bring to the table integrity, honesty, competence, follow through, attitude, humor, knowledge, expertise, and empathy. And an ultra high performing salesperson must have those traits, or they're not going to end up being a high performing salesperson. And on top of that, you can't just say, hey, I'm honest. Hey, trust me. Hey, what I'm telling you is the truth. Nobody believes that. You have to convey those strategic things. You have to convey integrity and honesty. It has to come across. You must come across that way to be considered legit and credible. You can't just say them. If anybody says to you, hey, I'm Dick Wagner, if I said this to you, hey, I'm Dick Wagner and I'm really trustworthy, I'm really credible, I'm really believable. Hey, to tell you the truth, hey, honestly, it would repulse many of you. Many of you would be extremely uncomfortable, and you wouldn't believe me, nor would you believe anybody that said those kinds of comments. So the challenge for the salesperson is to convey these traits in many different ways. One of them that we're going to talk about is the way and how and what you ask in power questions, because that's extremely crucial. Today, your customer wants to know whether you understand them. Do you understand your customer's goals? And believe me, they're running these things through their head. Do you demonstrate to that prospect that you feel their pain, you understand their pain, you may have a solution to resolve their pain? They want to know if you realize their dilemma or their situation or their problem. Do you understand their hot buttons, and can you talk their language? I've done other webinars, I've done many different videos on the topic of speaking their language. But now, so I'll touch just quickly here. You can go back to my videos on the Crest website and watch those videos to see more specifically. But in understanding their language, I'm specifically talking about when you're involved in your own organization, in the disaster restoration or the roofing industry, you have certain terminologies, certain language, certain acronyms that you use. Every one of us on this webinar, maybe with one exception, knows what a DHU is. But if you stopped and asked anybody else just out randomly out on the street, they have no clue. So the same goes for if you're calling on a hotel. If you're calling on a hotel and you don't know their terminology, their language, if you don't know the term heads in beds, if you don't know what shoulder season is, if you don't know how, well, it's called Rev Par. If you don't know what Rev Par is, then you don't know their language. And if you don't know their language, you are going to bring little or no credibility to the potential sale. Most people, most sales people, or most, excuse me, marketing people that call on prospects typically show up and throw up. They typically just spew out garbage. It might be, hey, we've been around XYZ time. We have so many employees. We do fire, water, smoke, mold, roofing. We do duct cleaning. We do power washing. We yada, yada, yada. Please don't show up and throw up. When a salesperson shows up and spews it all out there, often talking at a rapid rate of speed, they are proving to the prospect that they are nervous. They are proving to the prospect that they are not confident. They're showing that client that they've just been thrown into the mix, haven't had any training, and may or may not even believe in what they're selling or offering. And when they tell you, whether you've shown up and thrown up or whether you can present their feelings, their pains, their issues, and have logical solutions for them, the fact is that when they say, I don't have the time, folks, listen to me. They are not saying that they're busy. What they're saying is that whatever you have to say isn't worth my time. They're going to reject you, but they're rejecting you because you have not established believability, credibility. You have not established trust. Back one slide, I put on this, it's about urgency. And how it relates to urgency is this slide. How badly you're bleeding usually dictates how fast the ambulance driver races you to the hospital. If you're just bleeding a tiny bit, yeah, okay. If you're in an ambulance, they're not going to scream down the highway running red lights with sirens and lights blasting and flashing. They're going to take a more calm trip to the hospital. But if you're bleeding major, they're going to go like a bat out of you know what. They're going to go fast. And so what happens is the degree of pain, or in this case, the degree of bleeding that you have, determines the urgency. And so when you're selling, and you're selling a product that really requires consideration for urgency, you need to know how to create that urgency. In today's culture, you have to know their pains. You have to know how to alleviate, to get rid of, or minimize their pain. And those prospects that have pains, and they all do, are out there seeking pain relief, even if they don't consciously know it. When they hear about your potential pain relief option, they're going to listen, they're going to embrace you. And you better be able to provide legitimate proof that you can actually reduce their pain or their headache or their issue or the challenge or difficulty that they're struggling with in their business. And they're going to, the better you are at reducing that pain, the greater their desire is. Their desire increases, and they're going to attempt to improve their existing condition. They're going to attempt to embrace your pain option or your pain removal option, your solution. And let's not forget, almost everybody, almost every time, bases their decision on emotions. And then they justify it with logic after they've made the decision. We buy based on emotion. Okay, we need a new car, but we buy a car based on style, color, comfort. And after we've made the decision what vehicle we're going to buy, then we logic it in our head as to why we bought it. We bought red because that stands out. We bought a large SUV because it's safer and more comfortable and you can haul more people. That's the logic for why we make the decision based on emotions. To be a superstar salesperson, you absolutely have to understand how your buyer thinks. And I know this is really a tough point for many of you to embrace, but you've got to be opposite, think the opposite, do the opposite of what your competitor might be willing to do or what your competitor does. And sales is a step-by-step, repeatable process. And you need to learn how to flip the script. And specifically about flipping the script, for those of you that don't know what that term means, I'm going to give you an example in a minute, but I also want to remind you that everyone that is a Crest member can log into the Crest Network website and they can click on the button videos. And on there's dozens upon dozens of 8, 10, 12-minute videos. But let me tell you the couple of them that I think are extremely useful to you from a superstar sales perspective. We have one on there on the topic of stop using these phrases. We all do. We all tend to use them. Many of them are ingrained within us. I want you to watch that video to observe that or learn that. And then there is one specifically called Flipping the Script. It's a really simple, easy to understand, but extremely valuable step in the sales process. And I elaborate on it in that short video. Another one is the prospect is lying. How do you know that? There are so many great ways for salespeople to absolutely know when their prospect or their client is lying to you. No, we don't have crystal balls. No, we're not mind readers, but watching that video will give you some great insight. And then how to be irresistible in sales. I've had an awful lot of people chuckle about that. Being irresistible in sales, geez, I thought I was already really good looking. I thought people already loved me. But that's a great video, how to be irresistible in sales. It's like 10 minutes long. I think you would enjoy it. Another methodology, and this really comes into play when you're selling the commercial pre-disaster program, the prep program, it's called the herd theory. I didn't invent the herd theory, but I certainly embrace it, and I think it's an extremely powerful methodology to use when you're selling a pre-disaster program. Potential buyers are always trying to reduce the likelihood that they're going to make a poor decision. whenever any of us buy anything, we try to think through why that could potentially be a risk, why that might be a poor decision. And one of the ways that we are confident or somewhat reassured that we're making the right decision is because of the herd mentality or the herd theory, which is very simple. Everybody else is doing it, so it's probably safe. The perfect example of that is if you're calling on and trying to sell, calling on commercial clients, and you're trying to sell the PREP program, PREP, Priority Response Emergency Plan, which is a pre-disaster plan for commercial end users. My recommendation is that after you have some of those clients in your portfolio, getting the first one's always tough, but after you've got a few, they start to roll in and it becomes much easier. And so I would recommend that you get comfortable once you have clients such as Holiday Inn and Fairfield Inn and Marriott and so forth, is to get comfortable saying, "Hi, I'm Dick Wagner. I just wanted to let you know that the Holiday Inn, the Fairfield Inn, the Marriott, the Comfort Suites, the Happy Days Nursing Home and Heart Medical Center, and many others have seen the amazing value of our PREP program, and they've already signed up for it, and we've already mapped and tagged their building. I'd like to show you what our program consists of." When you do that, by rattling off, bang, 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 the names of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different clients that have already signed up, it takes the risk away for the existing client you're in front of. Their risk is reduced. The reason their risk is reduced is because, whoa, if the Marriott's doing it, it must be okay for my Hampton Inn. If the Hilton Garden Inn is doing it, it must be okay for my Comfort Suites company. And so utilizing the herd mentality or the herd process reduces the client's risk. And so suddenly you as the messenger aren't being critiqued to the same level. They've heard the message, and the message is, wow, all of these other clients have already done this for this company, for Dick Wagner. Wow, it might just as well seriously consider it because it must be okay. You see, people tend to follow the crowd rather than go it alone. People will feel far more likely that they're making the right decision when they know that everybody else is doing it. And I have to chuckle. I'm a perfectionist, as some of you know, and so I'm annoyed, but I'm not ashamed to tell you. In the last bullet point here, when the herd is doing it, obviously I was thinking of something else. Herd is what you hear with your ears rather than HERD. Shame on me. I did a good job reviewing it multiple times. I probably watched and presented this many times in the last few days. I still missed it. Folks, if there isn't any credibility on the part of the salesperson, the client will feel high risk. If the client feels high risk, the client is not going to buy from you. Leveraging curiosity simply means, and I've had this said to me in many, many, many of my classes, Dick, I can lead the horses to the water. I can take them there. I can present an incredibly compelling story and a compelling reason why they should buy. But I bang my head against the wall because I can't seem to make them drink. Some of you have heard me in my class. I have said, your job is to make them thirsty. Your job as a salesperson is not to make them drink. It's to make them thirsty. The way you make them thirsty is by asking really good questions. I call them power questions. The better you are at asking power questions, the thirstier they get. The thirstier they get, the more likely that they're going to drink on their own. When you do that well, when you ask power questions really good, they'll drink on their own. They're going to be curious. And I like the picture of the little boy hanging over the fence trying to see what's on the other side. The fence preventing him from seeing on the other side makes him curious. And so he finds a way to climb up and look over. If you want to be perceived as an expert, then you better ask expert questions. And those questions would come in a variety of different forms. And I have 6 or so of them up on the screen here. And there's some great questions to engage your client, to get them curious, to get them thirsty. And one of the very simple ones is, may I ask you a question? How many people that would say to you, may I ask you a question? How many would say, no, absolutely not? I know we get a few smart alecks that say, well, that's already a question. But the reality is, may I ask you a question? They're almost always 99.9% going to say, sure, yeah, what is it? Go ahead. And you can really pique their interest if you say, can I ask you a specific question? And if you want to really drive that nail deep into the board, ask or say, I have a question probably only you can answer. You went from, may I ask you a question? Curious. Can I ask you a specific question? Quite curious. To, I have a question probably only you can answer. Now I want to know what that question is. Or you can say, many of my clients have experienced, fill in the blank, XYZ. Many of my clients have experienced a big challenge in getting clients to do business with them. What about you? Or if you, Mrs. Insurance Agent, could wave a magic wand, what would you want? What would be that as it relates to your business, what would you want that magic wand to produce for you? That's a question that creates curiosity. You might even in today's world of stay at home, COVID-19, coronavirus, all of these other wild and crazy statuses that we're all experiencing in varying stages, you might say, immediately after you're able to go back out and interact with your prospects and your clients, how has the new normal changed your business? Believe me, most people will or are experiencing a new normal. It wouldn't surprise me if many of them are going to say, well, you know, the new normal just showed to us that we can do video conferencing, or we can permit a greater work at home environment. They're going to have answers because almost everybody is experiencing or will experience very shortly a new normal about how you or how they conduct business. Right now, each one of you on this webinar is experiencing a new normal, and it's going to continue to evolve and change far more than you ever expected 3 months ago. Remember, if they're not curious, then they're not interested. And if they're not interested, they're not going to buy. I want to touch on one or two other things that I think are extremely important. Many of us find ourselves in a situation of having to leave a voicemail or having the opportunity to leave a voicemail. The better you do at making that voicemail message sound curious, the better you are at piquing the interest of that person that hears that voicemail, the more likely it is that they'll call you back. So it could be one of these three. I gave just three examples. There are many that could be used. Hi, Mrs. Smith. I have a question only you can answer. Hi, Joe Keller. Tom Smith, your facilities manager, asked me to call you regarding a possible disaster. Hi, Rachel. We're currently working with several other hotels in the area, and we realize that you may also be experiencing the same headaches that they've been dealing with. We've been helping those other hotels. I'd like you to call me back at 440 whatever. That's a great way when you find yourself in a situation of needing to leave a voicemail message. Leave the message with curiosity. Don't show up on the message throwing up a bunch of sales garbage. Nobody wants to hear it. Most people will hit number 7 or the delete button pretty quickly, within 4 or 5 or 6 seconds. In an email message, that subject line is extremely critical. Your subject line can have things like, what would happen if, or 2 quick questions. And I mean, this is all you're putting in that subject line. If the topic at hand makes sense for that particular question line. Wanted to ask you a favor. Would like your opinion about ... You don't finish it. Would like your opinion about this. You've created curiosity. They may not respond to your email, but I can almost assure you they are going to read what you want their opinion about. Or if you have indeed talked to, quote unquote, Bob in maintenance, you're going to, and you've had a conversation where Bob said, yeah, you probably really need to run this by the owner, but hey, I think it's a great idea. You can say to Bob, Bob, is it okay that I tell your boss that you told me to talk to them? If he says yes, for heaven's sakes, leave a voicemail that says, hey, this is Dick Wagner. Wanted to talk with you, and Bob in maintenance, Bob in your maintenance department told me to contact you. That's more of the message, but it draws them in. It makes them curious. I got an email recently. I believe it was from Reed's Drawing Academy, but I can't remember for sure. And the subject line said, this just happened. That's it. Well, you know what? I'm curious. What just happened? I'm going to open the email. I'm going to read what just happened because I'm curious. We recently sent out a reminder, a newsletter about our upcoming Cat 5 conference here in Tampa, Florida in June. And the subject line was, yes, it's still on. If the person receiving that, and that email went out to about 2,000 people through constant contact, if that didn't create curiosity, I would be very surprised. And in fact, why I think it did create curiosity is because we had one of the highest opening rates on that constant contact email of any that we have ever had. That's telling me that it created curiosity. They're not going to open your email if it sounds fishy, if it sounds bogus, if it sounds like it's a sales pitch. But if you look through all of these, none of them really stick out as a sales pitchy kind of topic. Another one which many of you know about is the concept of Maven articles. I am not going to go online here in public and saying I invented Maven article concept, but I'm going to tell you that I absolutely perfected the Maven article concept. And without elaborating a lot on what Maven articles are, because you can go on to the Crest Network website and log in as a member and read the detailed explanation of what a Maven article is and how it works and how you should use it. But if you're handing your client or your prospect a Maven article, before they know who you are, this would be in the environment of calling on a hotel to offer a pre-disaster plan. When you're doing that, you need to leave the article and not give away your company name or your full name. You need to remain a mystery. You need to make them curious. When you do that, it enhances your preliminary credibility. Because when you first walk in and hand them a Maven article, you have zero credibility. They don't know you from anybody else, and so there isn't credibility established yet. It further differentiates you from every other salesperson. That's significant. On average, nationally, 15 marketers a day call on an insurance agency. If you're one of those 15, you better have differentiation, or they're not going to give you the time of day. Maven articles are so valuable after the sale because they continue to expand your credibility and raise the trust level with your client. Maven articles provide ongoing value and education, and sometimes edutainment, education and entertainment combined. When you deliver a Maven articles, it shows the client that you're on top of their business. You're aware of, you're paying attention to their industry. You are an expert in their industry. And believe me, even after you've made the sale, in this case, to a hotel or a nursing home or a daycare center or a church, you need to continue to build that trust level. You need to continue to differentiate yourself from your competition. The ultimate goal is to create the trusted advisor relationship. And for those of you that are Crest members, and I see on the list here all but maybe one of you currently are, with the right membership level, you have at your fingertips hundreds of Maven articles for many, many different topics, or many, many different, we call them verticals. So a hotel industry is a vertical. There are probably, I can tell you here, there are, bear with me, for hotels, there are 38 Maven articles. If you're visiting them once a month, there's 38 months worth. Insurance agents, if you're calling on insurance agents on a route, we've got 51 Maven articles. That means that you can call on that agent for more than 4 years without running out of specific insurance type articles for insurance agents. Please call me if you don't have the membership level that gets you access to Maven articles, because we've done all the work. The library is there, it's sitting there, and it's available for every Crest Elite member. There's always the challenge of establishing your own credibility. During initial cold call visits, during initial voicemails and sending emails doesn't afford you much credibility, if any. The only credibility that you could get is if there is name recognition to your own name or name recognition to your company. But that's about it, without you taking some active, positive steps to enhance your credibility with your client. Sellers start to have credibility when prospects form a favorable impression about them. And so how do you do that? You speak their language. You ask comfort questions. You ask power questions. You know already and tell them, let them know that you know what their hot buttons are, and identify and talk about their pains. And then when you have that opportunity, especially if you're trying to sign them up to a pre-disaster program, utilize that herd mentality or that herd philosophy and use the name drop methodology. It works. Prospects, this is one of my favorites. Prospects are reluctant to share bad news. Your client doesn't want to share bad news with you. What would that bad news be? That bad news could be they're not interested. And they know that if they say we're not interested, that's really giving the salesperson bad news. And prospects don't like to give bad news unless they're pathological. And salespeople don't want to hear bad news. So salespeople dance around the critical questions. Salespeople usually present their questions in a positive light so that they're hoping and praying that the client is going to give them a positive response. The salesperson fears the risk of failure. And so the possibility of hearing bad news makes the hard questions difficult to ask. Many people, this is both the customer or client and the salesperson, will sidestep an extremely difficult or a negative issue and then make up some convenience excuse rather than telling bad news. So what might that look like? You stop in to talk to the hotel manager. You want to sell them the prep program. And the front desk person goes and tells him you're out there. And the front desk person comes back and says, he just says he's slammed right now to catch him in a couple months. What he just did is he skirted the negative issue. He didn't shut you down. He didn't tell you flat, go away, leave him alone, never come back. He didn't even want to tell you bad news. So what did he do? He stalled you off for 2 months, hoping that he won't be there the next time you come in, or you won't show up the next time because you have forgotten or you moved on. So people don't ask questions about bad news. They formulate them in ways that sound like you could possibly get a positive answer. Selling also is not an activity. We don't leave the office and go out and make a sale. That's what an activity is, and that's not how it's done. Sales is a process. Selling is a process. Within that process, there has to include the concept of urgency. People, if there is no urgency, there will be no sale. And the greater the urgency, the more likely the sale. Get good at asking strategic power questions. It's so frustrating to me that salespeople are often so timid about asking power questions. Power questions are those that cause your client or your prospect to go, ooh, wow, yikes, are you serious? Oh man, that's a tough question. I've got to think about that for a minute. When you can ask that kind of a question, it's a power question. And when you ask that question, it enhances or increases or improves your credibility. And when you ask that question, it's much more likely that they're going to provide you with great information to help you discover even more about the actual pains they're dealing with in their organization. Asking these questions puts you in a unique position of strength. And what's so interesting is that the better you are at asking questions, the more powerful you are in the sales process. But people think, wow, he's a great listener when you ask power questions and then shut up and wait for the answer. And if you're asking really good power questions, you as the salesman then have the power in the sales conversation. If you allow the client to ask you 50 questions, they are controlling the sale, and they will ultimately make the decision against you rather than embrace you. You can't answer enough questions positively to overcome that. They're in the driver's seat, and that client is going to shut you down after they have exhausted all of their questions. So you need to get in the habit right out of the gate of asking power questions of your client and then shutting up and letting them answer your question. This is something that I do all the time. especially since I'm not out doing a lot of cold call visits right now. I used to. I did it for many years, almost, I don't know, 12 or 14 years in this industry. I do a lot of cold phone calling. I even do a lot of phone calling where the client doesn't specifically know that I'm going to call. And so I always ask, is this a bad time? I'm not afraid to ask the question where I might get a negative answer. You see, it's very possible if I ask the question, is now a bad time? They will very likely say, yes, it's a bad time. If they say that, then the reality is it is a bad time for that client. The cool part about that is that almost always when you ask that, they're going to tell you if it's indeed a bad time, and then they're going to give you or suggest a better time. Once they suggest a better time, like, oh yeah, now is a bad time. Can you call me back in an hour? They've just given you permission and requested that you call them back in 1 hour. Man, that's powerful. Now they're expecting your call. And if they say, no, now's not a bad time, they've just given you permission to move forward. Try to think about this in terms of, is now a good time? If you ask everybody, is now a good time? Most people are probably, if it's not a good time, they're going to lie and say, yeah, I got a couple minutes. When in fact, they really don't. And a couple minutes is more than you probably, or is less than what you need. So get in the habit. Whenever you call somebody, ask them if now is a bad time. When you're calling on prospects and clients that generally already know you, like an insurance agency, when you walk in to visit, say to the front desk person, that CSR, hey, is now a bad time? They're going to tell you, yeah, all heck hit the fan. We're slammed. I can't even think straight right now. When they do that, and if they don't volunteer in a better time, suggest one. Do you think tomorrow morning would be better? Yes, that would be much better. They've just given you permission to come back tomorrow morning. So, cold call visits. Are you ready to do a presentation? If you're ready, you need to be asking that person if they're the right person to hear that presentation. Who else might be involved in a decision involving this presentation? Would it make sense to get them involved before we move forward with the presentation? And then ideally, specific, and again, this is if you're presenting to a vertical such as a hotel or a nursing home, is having specific property questions, answers that you already know, but you still ask them anyway. And the reason is so that you can demonstrate to them in the form of a question that you have indeed done your homework. When you say this, can I ask you a couple specific questions about your property? Almost everybody will say yes. And when they say yes, they're asking you to proceed. And when they say yes, they're being receptive to you. It also gets them engaged in the process. When they're explaining something to you that isn't absolutely clear to you, you should be saying one of these 6 or 7 or 8 types of questions. They tell you something and you say, well, like what? Or, really? And then what happened? No kidding. Can you elaborate on that? These are great, engaging questions that keep your prospect talking and giving you additional information. It's referred to in the sales world as discovery. The more you can discover about that client, the quicker and better you can determine whether they are a valid client, likely to be on your A list, or whether you need to get rid of them entirely. When you're selling the pre-disaster program and you've done the presentation and they don't fully understand the program, they're ultimately going to say no. If they don't fully understand what you're selling, they're going to say no. So during the process, as you're presenting and when you're done presenting, ask them if the program makes sense. Ask them if there's anything that wasn't completely clear to them. And then these are great questions to engage them and get them talking. Is, what was your favorite part about this program that we have available? And then, presumably they're going to tell you what they liked about it. And so now you come back with, what do you see as a potential roadblock? Now they might come back and say, well, our owner this, or our owner that, or as the owner, I'm really concerned about XYZ or whatever it is. If there are other decision makers that are going to be in the mix, but you simply weren't able to do the presentation for all interested parties, and so you know that ultimately this presentation has got to move up the ladder, maybe to the C-suite, say, John, if you were able to make the decision completely on your own, and I understand you have a boss, but if you were able to make it completely on your own, what would you do? How would you go forward? What a great way to find out if they're giving you a buy-in. John, since you believe this is a really good program, how can I help you convince the other decision makers? Man, that is so valuable. That's so powerful, because now they're telling you how to convince their boss, or they're telling you what you need to provide for them to help them convince their boss. So I want to sum this up. I want to wrap this up. We've been going for almost 1 hour. There are 6 prerequisites to closing sales. Number 1, there has to be a recognized need. If you haven't identified their pain and the solution you're offering solves that pain, there's no recognized need. What you're offering must be a viable solution. It must be useful, helpful, valuable, and not painful. Whatever the value must be justified by the cost, or the cost must be justified by the value. And when you're selling a pre-disaster program, you all know that it's free. And so you don't have a struggle or an issue justifying the value, because there is no cost. You have to be able to create a sense of urgency. And yeah, there has to be authority to buy. If you're presenting to somebody that has no authority, you probably wasted your effort at a bare minimum. And then further, if they have the authority to buy, they have to have a willingness to buy. And so Those are your challenges when you're moving forward. Folks, thank you so much for watching this webinar. I'm Dick Wagner with the Crest Network. Reach out to me, call me, talk to me, or call Bill. Bill is always going to be welcoming your phone call. Leave him a voicemail message or send him a text. He'll respond. Thanks, folks. Have a great day.